Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this webinar called VR4LongCovid, the breathtaking results. Today we're going to look at the projects that derived from the VR4LongCovid project that started after the corona pandemic. The Interact Northwest Europe program called for extra project ideas, and we built a project with the VR4 rehab team along long COVID. And we started in 2021 with hackathons, and then we went on to game jams, and finally we selected 3 projects that started a challenge to build an effective COVID treatment, long COVID treatment program. And today we're going to show you the results and we're going to discuss them with you. So I'm very pleased that this journey has come to an end, and I'm very proud that we have used the Interact subsidy to do so. But before we go into our breathtaking results, we thought it would be wise to call in an expert on the field of long COVID, a GP who has dedicated his work for patients with, let's say, more or less unexplained issues. He started back in 2007 with Q fever, which by then was an unknown disease in the Netherlands. And now he's dedicated his career to long COVID. So I'm going to ask on the floor Dr. Alfons Oldelohuis.
Yeah,
Alfons, welcome on board. You work for C Support,
yeah,
which is focusing on the support for long COVID patients.
exactly. Yeah.
And you're going to tell us all about it.
Yeah.
So the floor is yours.
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you all, and I'm delighted to have the possibility to speak here as a GP. I'm just a normal GP. I always worked in a rural environment, and I discovered with my colleague the Q fever, what is a little bit similar to the post-COVID. And then the government asked me to make a project for post-COVID people in Holland. And I will show you later the results. I'm sorry for my little bit poor English. I'm really a rural GP, but I will try. First slide is a vet farm in Wuhan, where now almost 3 years ago the COVID pandemic started. And I still now I feel sorry with that farmer that has a bat pressing against an amarillo, and that's the way we know for sure now, because bats and for sure horseshoe bats are taking away lifetime a lot of SARS-CoV viruses. Next slide. I made a talk for the World Health Organization about long COVID already 2 years ago, and I was thinking long COVID could be possible, will be only a few people, and let's say in Holland about 15 or 20,000 people, and it will be cured in the primary care. But it changed a lot. It is a challenge for rehabilitation. Some facts. 619 million people had COVID worldwide. 6.9 million deaths worldwide. 67 million people that have post-COVID. That means, by definition, longer than 3 months having more complaints about post-COVID. The cost in Netherlands are estimated in 8 billion euro yearly. That's an immense, that is immense. And in Holland we have about 500,000 post-COVID people, and most of them are getting better by primary care during a half a year, but about 50,000 people are more than 1 year, and more than 25,000 people are more than 2 years complaining of post-COVID, and they are really in bad shape. We call it post-COVID because it's a syndrome, and I will tell you more about it. The World Health Organization says there are 4 needs for post-COVID. That is vaccination. Ghebreyesus meant vaccination is also good in poor regions to have a better suppressing of the COVID virus. But we now know that vaccination is also protecting against post-COVID. Second, he says, more research. And till now, still is very important to have more research. Third, he said, it is important that we make data, big data, because there are many people and it's a really difficult disease. And the fourth, he said, people suffering from post-COVID needs a healthcare taker that knows about it and knows about integrality. It's a system disease, so a single visit to a cardiologist or a pulmonologist will not cure you. C-Support, where I'm working and leading, has till now monthly 1,000 people that are admitted. C-Support is financed by government, but people are free and get support. And as you see at the left figure, 75% is women. That is impressive, because why are there so many women? We also know that some people are especially vulnerable for post-COVID, that are women, that are people that have asthma, people that have tissue disease, people that have attention deficit disorder, and people that have autoimmune problems. But very important, 75% of the people were, till they get COVID, completely well. Were very active in sporting and so on. These are the most important complaints. And you see fatigue, neurologic disease. There are more than 200 complaints combined with post-COVID. That is far too much, but it's really a big issue. You see, there are many, many problems. Last 2 years, there were 2 main issues, and let me talk now about what is new about it. We know that since May 2020, article of Iwasaki says that all post-acute infection syndromes are a little bit the same. They have the same problems, and if it is from Ebola, or if it is from Q fever, or it is from dengue or from COVID, they are a little bit the same. They have their own cherry, we always say, because in COVID it's the smell, in Ebola it's the cornea lesions, because there is mainly, in dengue it's the knee, but so there are some difference, but they have all the same problems, and that are fatigue, an exertional intolerance, we call that PEM, and that means that after a small working job, if it's thinking or writing or walking, they get extremely tired. An unrefreshing sleep. They have neurologic problems, headaches, concentration problems. They have dysautonomy. They have flu-like symptoms. They get weekly or daily or monthly, sometimes a little bit flu, and they get myalgia and arthralgia. Are those patients good looking? This is a good looking young lady, a woman, and if you see her, you should say, and that's also the problem in the belief of many healthcare workers, is it a disease or is it just a burnout or something like that? But this lady, she is a doctor and she has an oxygenation applied on her finger, and I hope it can work. I don't know how the movie could start. Yeah, she's now going to stand. And you see the heart rate on the right side is going up. That's what we call POTS. It's one of the main symptoms of post-COVID, that the autonomic nerve center in the brainstem and in the brain is not working, which gives that there is a vagus and sympathicus dysfunction. It sounds a little bit difficult, but it's quite normal with all post-infectious disease, and it gives hints to neuroinflammation. This is a treatment we call hyperbare zuurstof therapy, and that is under pressure are people who are suffering from post-COVID in getting a lot of oxygen, which makes the small vessels a little bit better. This is about viral persistence. I will talk later about it. This is about microclots, and the right one is about the lungs. Many people have post-COVID went to a pulmonologist, and they make a picture, or they do an exercise, and they see no big difference. But if you have the correct method, then you can see that there is something wrong. There is a dysfunctional breathing. This is an important one. It's from a Dutch research, and that's about the brain fog. These are scans with the TSPO scan, and they show the the three below are normal patients. Left above is a young woman, a nurse, and the right one is a male. The male came from the hospital, was a long time on the intensive care. The woman at the left side, the nurse, was completely healthy till post-COVID. And you see a lot of neuroinflammation. That's a big issue in post-COVID, also connecting to the brain fog. Now, I come to the major findings. This is a recent article from Davis, Hannah Davis, in Nature, and it says that long COVID, the findings are, and it was from February this year. Let's see that there is 5 important hypotheses about post-COVID. To the left, viral persistence. In COVID, we know the immunity is disturbed. sometimes too low, sometimes too high. Left is too low, viral persistence, viral are in tissue staying there and can sometimes restart. And also other diseases that they had before, like Epstein-Barr virus or herpes virus, can restart. The second one is microbiome. Microbiome is, and the virome is your intestine. Your intestine is the brain-gut barrier is a very important one in how you can survive infections. And there is more and more important issues that a disbalance in your gut is producing a lot of neuroinflammation products. The middle one is mimicry. That is where you all work about. Mimicry is hyperinfection, which makes that our immune system, that is very complicated, is working against our own cells, like tissue or thyroid, and that is mimicry. It's an important one. The fourth one are your vessels. Post-COVID is giving a microvasculitis, we call that, a small vessel disease with clotting, and that is also in the brain and also in the legs, but in all tissue is it a big issue. The fourth, and that's the last one, is the dysautonomy. That's also called in the POTS that I showed you before. There is when you get cold hands when it's not necessary, or warm hands when you should have cold hands, or stomach pain. That is autonomic dysfunction. It's the system of your life that makes you to be able to fly or to relax. And that's a very important, and that are possibilities by biomarkers to start with. The right one is easy to treat. The vascular damage is also a little bit started with anticoagulants. And so are the many possibilities coming. There is till now no main cure for post-COVID, but there are many solutions on the way, and there are many hypothesized mechanisms, pathophysiologic mechanisms, but they are all in involvement. That's what I wanted to tell. Last is about that it is a system disease. There is no part of the body that cannot be involved by post-COVID. That's very important. And what I always, we in our practice where we have 24,000 people, that is very much, because it means that there is some lack in the organization of our healthcare, that there are so many people that need to see us, because we are no clinic or something like that. We are able to start research, but we cannot treat them. And in that case, we always try to make it biopsychosocial model working, that is biological. You have the post-COVID, psychological, it has its impact, and for sure, if you have post-COVID more than 2 years, you get early depression, you get anxiety, and so on. And also it will be sociologic. You must have the home care, you work, you lose your job, you are depending on the goodness of other people, you lose your wife or your men or the children. I see a lot of people that sleep, young people that have children that sleep in the night by their parents, and having the children left to their husband. What can we do? That's important. Personal and integral. Pacing is very important, and that's also the connection with this, because there is one thing we know for sure: personal, integral, and pacing is far the best treatments till now. For the rest, there is no definite treatment, but there are a lot upcoming. Vaccination, Paxlovid, but I leave that because of time. Summary: post-COVID has a lot of phases and many disease drivers. There is need for a really urgent need for much more research. For the healthcare, it's a challenge. Primary care and pacing is the magic word till now. And for the 2.5% of the people that are very ill because of the post-COVID, we need expert center, and that's where we are working on very hard. And I want to end with Einstein, because in my belief, post-COVID, the big amount of post-COVID, because 67 million are really quite a lot, has to do with lifestyle. And Einstein said it already. I cannot read it from here, but Einstein said human is a special character, limited in time and space. That's really Einstein. But he experienced himself as something special, above nature and animals. And that's a big in fact, it's a prison, because it's a big mistake to embrace your world and to live and to see nature growing, embrace other animals. Life gets really a lot better. That's what I want to say.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Olde Lohuis, for these wise words and this interesting talk. You did quite well with your English, so you shouldn't be ashamed of anything. We could easily follow it and understand it. So once again, thank you very much for this interesting lecture and this interesting introduction to long COVID. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. But we've now listened to an expert on the complexity of long COVID, but maybe it's also good to have a look at how long COVID is infecting true patients. And in the earlier stages of our project, during the hackathon, we were able to speak to 2 of them, and we made a video of that. So I want you all to see our colleague from Ireland, Professor Joseph McVeigh, and he will talk to Catherine Thompson and to later on to Rebecca Logan, and they will tell how COVID has infected their personal lives.
Kathy, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to have a conversation with us again. I know you presented at the first webinar for VR for Rehab. I think it's almost 2 years ago now. What we wanted to do was just get an update with you to see how you're keeping, what your journey's been like, and to see if you've progressed, if you've recovered to any extent, and really how you're feeling at the moment and what that journey's been like.
Okay. So I guess my journey has been quite bumpy. It's not been linear. So that's been one of the things that has taken a bit of getting used to, because as a physio, you're used to being able to predict people's recovery and plan forwards with rehab. But it's been anything but. I've now had COVID 4 times in the last 3 years. So I had a viral infection initially in January 2020, then April 2020, and then I was struggling in terms of trying to get back to work on a sort of a fairly extended phased return to work until February 22, when I got COVID again. And I've been off work since February 22. And I was doing fairly well last year. I'd learned to pace. I'd learned to pace both physically and cognitively, which is really difficult. But I've sort of learned how to manage it. And then December last year, I got COVID again, which has pushed me backwards once more. So I now know what I need to be doing, and it's just that slow return back, putting all the strategies in place. And I think with all the things that I can do that helps, I have to get the pacing bit right. And if I don't get that right, it doesn't really matter what else I do, because all the other things are adjuncts, but it's the pacing that is key. And I find if I stick within my capabilities, I can do more, which is quite strange because it goes against everything that we tend to do in physio. It's usually just push your boundaries a bit more, try and do that little bit extra. But less is more, I've found with COVID. So not overdoing. I'm walking the dog, and I'm probably better physically than I am cognitively. Yeah. But so I walk the dog in the morning and in the afternoon. And if I don't push it, I'm okay. But if I push it and do longer distances or incorporate more hills, I'd struggle afterwards.
And are you back to work yet, or are you still doing a phased return to work, or how is that?
I've not worked since last February, so over a year, and I'm not going back to work. Okay. I would need a phased return, and it would need to be longer than the normal, with a lot of adjustment.
And in terms of your physical activity, then you're doing a little bit, and you're slowly, gradually building up that which you can do. Do you experience the crisis anymore, or is that something that is behind you now? Do you have those very severe crises where you have to watch cricket, if I recall?
That's The IPL starts later today, so that's not too much of a hardship. I quite like doing that. When I crashed, when I had my major crash, that's all I was able to do. So I've not had a crash like that, but I think that's because the amount that I did was so way beyond what I was capable of doing. And now I've learnt how to manage much better. So I think my symptoms are better because I'm better at managing things, and I wouldn't be in that position. Well, if I was going back to work, I'd just refuse point blank to do more than I knew I was capable of doing now. So I have much more, can't think of the word. I have boundaries now that I wouldn't go beyond.
You understand your condition, what you can do, and that information, again, in some of the work that we've all been doing around long COVID, is trying to get to the point where the patient understands what they can and can't do, and information about their condition and how to manage, and all those self-management skills are critically important. Yes. In terms of the cognitive impact, and again, the last time I remember you describing when you were driving the car and you actually forgot, you were coming up to a red light and you forgot what to do, or you couldn't process the information, and that was horrendous. Are you able to function? Are you able to drive now? Do you have the sort of cognitive abilities to do that?
I have the cognitive ability to, but the concentration is hard. So the amount that I can drive would depend on how I was at that particular moment in time. So if I concentrate too hard and the journey is too much, I don't crash in the same way, but I would have like a mini relapse. I might be more ill for a few days afterwards.
Rebecca, thank you very much for joining us here today. The purpose of this brief interview, and I know you're not feeling very well, so I'm going to keep it very short for you. The purpose of this here is just to get an update from you in terms of your long COVID. You were very kind to contribute to our hackathon, which was 2 years ago now, believe it or not, as a person suffering from long COVID. And what we really want to do is get a sense of how you've been since then, how you are now, and how is long COVID progressing. So if you don't mind, thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. From the last time that we did the hackathon, I would say that my long COVID has probably deteriorated, or my symptoms and my disability has got worse, unfortunately. The long COVID itself has the fatigue and pain, brain fog and so on has not got any better, and at times has got worse. I've also developed other symptoms like an immunology, brain fog condition, and I'm getting treatment for that. I've got chronic spontaneous urticaria caused by COVID. For the last year, my ability to do daily activities is very, very low. I spend 75% of the day in bed or lying down because of fatigue and pain. And just bearing in mind that I was a fitness instructor and staff emergency department nurse, this is just totally the opposite to how I was. I have tried over the 3 years exercise and exercise programs, even chair exercise, and it's just not, my body just seems to reject it. I go to a physio regularly, and even she recognizes that, you know, exercise isn't the right path for me. Everyone's different, but you know, for me, my exercise could be washing my hair,
sure,
or getting out of bed. Sometimes, like lately, just getting out of bed has drained me of any energy I would have had for that day. So obviously I've learned over the last 3 years to pace really well. And in all honesty, that's the only thing that helps me manage day to day. There's no medication, there's no treatment that is going to cure or help me, but understanding and learning how to pace strictly is the only way I can manage day-to-day life without completely going mad.
I'm speaking on behalf of the XhaleR team.
Wait a minute, Owen. Welcome back, everybody. I think I found it shocking to see that those long COVID effects still occur even after 2 years. So thinking that COVID is over is totally wrong if we talk about long COVID. Long COVID is a true and serious problem and should be addressed, as the first speaker said and as these patients just explained. Through our Interact supported VR4LongCovid project, we have thought of 3 solutions and worked out 3 solutions which we will present now. And the first one, I'm very proud of that they will present, is a solution that was thought of in Ireland. It's called the XhaleRs, and for that we're going to turn to our friend and colleague Owen O'Ryan at the University College in Cork. So Owen, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks Remco. So as Remco said, my name's Owen O'Ryan. I was a developer for the XhaleR team, and we're really excited to show you our VR pacing game that we've developed over the last little while. So it really was a group effort, and everyone you see here was a great contributor from our researchers, our clinicians, and our patient partners. So without them, you know, we wouldn't be where we are now. It's just a big thank you to them. So as we all may know by now, there's a wide range of different symptoms involved in long COVID. And here are just a few graphics from a recent report that was put out by Davis et al., just referenced below here. So there were just over 3,700 patients interviewed in this report. and they were from 56 different countries. And from them, there was 205 symptoms noted in 10 different organs. So it's quite a wide range that that's being addressed. So the top 3 symptoms that we've noted was fatigue, post-exertional molasses, and brain fog. So these were the 3 most common symptoms that we molded our project around that we wanted to address. So from these people, 61% noted after their 7th month that they were still impaired in their daily activities. 45% were still working reduced hours, with 22% still not working. So it's quite debilitating, and that's why we felt these were the key 3 to work towards. So the overall goal of our project was to develop a VR pacing experience. So we molded our project around the 3 Ps is what we were calling it. And that's pacing, planning, and prioritization. So with these, we wanted the user to be taught how to self-manage and to plan pacing into their daily activities by prioritizing their tasks. So with that said, we began our concept and worked towards an art style. So here's just a few examples of some of the inspirations we took, with our final one on the bottom right, and you can probably see them behind me too. So we went for a cartoon stylization, and this was a key decision because we could have gone for a more realistic approach to try create that level of immersion that a lot of people would take from a more realistic experience. But we found that by going that approach, we run the risk of encountering the uncanny valley, which some of you may know is the experience when you see a humanoid character, but there's something just a bit off about them and they don't quite look real, or they might not move exactly correctly. And that can pull a person from an immersive experience. So by going all in on a cartoon stylization that's not realistic, the user just seemed to accept this is the environment they're in and work towards that. So we developed a non-human character that the user would then navigate through the different scenes. So an overview of our full application, there was 4 key sections. There's the user experience, or the UX. So because our experience is tailored towards long COVID patients, we wanted this to be a seated experience where they wouldn't need to overexert. So the task would be relatively effortless to complete in a seated upright position. Next was the GUI, or the graphical user interface. So we had a main menu which would clearly navigate the user through the different scenes and give them information on the tasks at hand. As well, we'll address it a little bit later on, but we have an energy management aspect to the scene. So there is a battery that'll be located on the scene, and this is just one of the key GUIs that will be experienced throughout. Next was the different scenarios. So when I say scenario, I'm referring to the different levels in our experience. So we have at present 8 different scenarios, 3 of which are tutorials to get the user used to the environment. Another 3 are the main pacing experiences, and then 2 of them are more information experiences, so the introduction and closing the experience on a recap. Next is the data analysis. So throughout the experience, there is information being recorded to the headset, and the user can track back through their history and review their historical data and how they've progressed. So just to give you a quick run through the different tutorials we have. So, and this is just more of an introduction for the user to the environment, because a lot of those who we've tried this on before may not have experienced virtual reality. So it was a new experience in that regard, something we would be well used to it, but we wanted to get them used to both the environment and the interactions they would have to complete. So the first one was teeth brushing. So the user would have to reach out and grab an object before interacting with a live object in the scene. So this just gets them used to the different cartoon stylizations and mechanics throughout the scene. The next was the washing dishes. So because some of these tasks can be quite laborious, we didn't want the user to have to stand up and move towards an object in order to pick it up. In this instance, they can just point, click, and it'll snap to their hands so that they can grab it and interact. Once they've completed it, they can drop it off in the depositing area, shown here as the dish rack. And next was the walking tutorial. So this is the first instance where the user will be navigating their non-human character through a scene in order to achieve an objective, in this instance, reaching the shop or the building you see here. We did this by creating a node map where the character will follow a specific route, so they can't just cross the road, they have to cross at a pedestrian crossing and follow the footpath. So next was the pacing levels that the user will be brought into. So the first was the introduction. And this is a scene where you're introduced to your non-human character and given a brief overview of long COVID, the different symptoms that would be involved, and the what they can experience or what's upcoming in the experience itself. Next is the walking scenario. So similar to the tutorial, the walking scenario is where the user must instruct their character to navigate to and from the shop. But this is the first instance where they'll experience the energy management, which you can see above. So in this, when the user is carrying out any laborious tasks, such as walking, or you'll see in different instances, picking up objects, collecting, or whichever, the battery will begin to reduce. So it's important that the user manages their exertions and plans breaks throughout. So in this instance, they'll be able to take a break whenever their character reaches a bench. They can select the break button and they will rest and replenish their battery. Next is the cooking scenario. So this is one of our more complex experiences. So there's a lot of tasks that the user must complete in order to work their way through this experience. So that involves collecting ingredients, preparing them, cooking them, and plating them up. So there's a lot of different instructions the user must follow, and we wanted to do this to lend itself to symptoms of brain fog, to allow the user to practice focusing and listening to the narrator and prioritizing their tasks, all while maintaining their energy levels with constant review of the battery. Next is the laundry task. So this varies from the different, or from the last couple of experiences, in that it still focuses on pacing, but we wanted to focus a little bit more on prioritization. So the user doesn't have to collect all the different clothing elements in the scene. They just need to collect enough that they're happy that they've used their energy efficiently, and they can deposit them in the washing machine to end the scene. So if they've used their energy efficiently and not overexerted, they'll still achieve a good score. Finally, there's a recap, which runs through different lessons learned throughout the scene and just reiterates the different points that they may have encountered and where they can improve and what to focus on in futures. So the scene or the scenario integration was a key element of our experience. We wanted to be able to develop offline off of the main branch of the experience. And we did this by creating a scenario manager. So with the scenario manager, we could create these prefab scenarios, which when they're ready to go, we would just click and drag and drop them into the scenario manager, and they would be ready to go and drop straight into the GUI main menu. So the benefit of this was that it would allow for a seamless integration of new content into the scene with minimal amount of alterations needed to the main scene itself. Also, by having this, we weren't developing multiple different scenes in the game engine. We were developing prefabs, so there wouldn't be any load screens required. The prefabs would just come into being rather than having a load screen which can pull the user from an immersive perspective. Next was the energy management. So as you may have guessed at this point, energy is a key focus of our experience. So here's the GUI you may have observed in the scene. So green represents the energy that the user has remaining in the scene, White is their recoverable energy if they were to take breaks. And red represents irrecoverable energy. So if the user was to overexert, this resembles the post-exertional molasses in that they won't be able to recover this energy even with a break. So it's all about not overexerting, taking regular breaks in order to maintain adequate energy. So from feedback we experienced in our user testing, we had suggestions that there would be a more user-friendly approach to the battery. So we created a more familiar energy representation by a smartwatch, and the user could interact with this object to take breaks. Next was the application settings. So there's 3 settings here. One was low settings, so that there would be more benches for the user to take breaks on in the walk. You couldn't burn the food, which is a setting I'd like in real life. And you could also reduce the amount of clothes in the laundry collecting scene. Next was the energy level. So this wouldn't have any impact on the main experience itself, but it would record it to the user's data so that they could review it in later time. Next was enabling break reminders. So we felt this was important for the user to be notified if they wish to take breaks throughout the scene. So if a task was to take longer than, in this instance, 4 minutes to complete, a notification would pop up on their smartwatch suggesting a break, and they could pause the experience if they wish, or just dismiss the notification. Next was the player's progress panel. So this is where that data that's being stored is being displayed. So it's all stored locally on the headset itself, and it's represented in a UI-friendly presentation you see here, where the user can review previous sessions and the battery they've finished on, if they've overexerted, and the different levels they've scored throughout. As you can see here as well, there is a data export button. So when they select this, the data is exported to a CSV file on the headset itself, and the user is notified where on the headset it's located, so the user can connect their headset to a PC and retrieve the CSV file. At the moment, it's in the format below, but we would strive to have this in a more user-friendly UI representation, such as charts and graphs. So possible future developments of this project would be to create new scenarios, continually add more day-to-day task representations like gardening, shopping, cleaning up after dinner, things like that. As well as this, we'd have additional features based on user feedback. We would want to do more end-user testing. So at present, we've tested with physios, occupational therapists, students, and patients with long COVID. And we would like to test more with long COVID patients in order to get their valuable feedback. We would also, at the moment, we've developed for the Quest 2, and we'd like to expand our devices. So have it adaptable to multiple headsets in order to reach a wider audience. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed our project. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much, Owen, for this great talk and this great contribution. Very interesting to see how your energy levels can affect your daily life and how you can manage those energy levels. And congratulations to all the good work you've been doing. Meanwhile, if any of you, our viewers in the webinar, want to ask something to Owen about his research, you can do so in Webinar Geek, and then Owen will respond in the chat in Webinar Geek. So please go ahead, and if you have any more questions, interact with UCC there. Meanwhile, we will go to our next speaker, who is involved with a project called Explore Deep. And Explore Deep has truly embraced beautiful design together with respiratory management. So therefore I'm going to invite to the stage Dr. Joanneke Weertmeester. And Joanneke is an independent consultant and scientist who's also affiliated to the Radboud University. So Joanneke, please join me on stage. And we're dying to know what Explore Deep has done and how it has helped long COVID patients. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here as a representative of Team Explore Deep. And I'm going to tell you what we've done within the scope of the VR4Rehab project and some of the results that we found so far. So Deep is a virtual reality game that is controlled by breathing. Specifically, it's meant to provide a nice, relaxing, engaging environment to practice deep diaphragmatic breathing, so deep belly breathing. And we know that this type of breathing is, for instance, very helpful when relieving anxiety or stress. So that's also why the initial development and the initial research that we've done was mostly focused on anxiety. But among other things, through this project, we were able to expand that scope and to research what other things it could be helpful for. And so within the VR4Rehab project, we were looking at whether it could be useful for patients with long COVID and also functional disorders, which I'm going to get into in a second. So these are the partners that we've worked with within this project, the care partners. So it was actually quite challenging to find a suitable partner who was working with long COVID patients. But luckily then we were connected with partners from Sint Mauritius, Dr. Muller, and with also partners from the Wroclaw Medical University and Etude Network, who were working with patients with functional disorders or functional neurological disorders. And so they reached out to us to see whether Deep could be useful for them. And actually this is very interesting because if you look at it, actually the patients groups have a lot of similarities with long COVID, but also functional disorders, because they both have a wide range of different physical symptoms, but also often some mental issues. So in this sense, actually Deep would be an interesting combination because it's breath-based, but it's also focused on anxiety regulation. And for specifically Saya, our colleague at the Etude Network, was looking whether breathing dysregulation could be a mechanism underlying a lot of functional disorders. So in that way, a lot of the research that we did in this project initially started with this patient group. But then later on, we were also connected to a team from the Radboud University Medical Center who did have access to people with long COVID. And so we're also setting up a research pilot with them right now. So I'll briefly walk through some of the achievements that we've achieved within this project. On the development side, but also on the research side. So on the development side, one very important part that we changed to the game was that we ported the experience, the Deep experience, to the Pico headset. One of the reasons why we did this is because it's, for instance, way more easier to clean, so way more suitable for clinical and medical contexts. So we knew that it was important to make this switch from the Oculus headsets that we were using before. And actually this headset is also way more lightweight, and it's also in some ways a lot more user-friendly. So this was an interesting step for us. Other things that we did was we redeveloped some of the hardware. So one of the main ways that you control the game is by wearing this belt on your diaphragm with a stretch sensor that measures how deeply you breathe in and out. And that is the way you also move through the environment. So in our previous versions, this was connected by a wire to a laptop or sometimes to the headset. But we knew that this was important to make more user-friendly. We also heard that from our medical partners. So what we did is we made it wireless. It's now Bluetooth enabled. And you don't even need to go into any settings in the headset. It just finds each other. Once you start the game, it will find the belt and it's connected. It's also way more easier to put on. So here you see that it almost has like a car seat clasp. So yeah, it's easy to put on and adjust. We've also made some changes to the control scheme and the user experience within Deep itself. Well, one of the things we also did is create a user manual, for instance, because, well, it's very important to know how to use it and how to run a session. But we also changed some of the controller instructions. So that now, for instance, you can see that in the image in the top there, is that now you can see the mapping of the controls so that you know which button does what when you are in VR. And we also expanded the things that you can control as a clinician running a session. So for instance, we added a session where if people have some trouble navigating, you can click one button and you're back to the right path. But you can also, for instance, start back to the beginning, all of those options to add more control over the environment and over the session. Another important thing that we changed was player onboarding. And by that we mean that the previous version, it was the case that, well, you put on the headset, you went in the game, and immediately you would be breathing and moving, and you had to steer at the same time. But especially for training purposes, it was way more important to gently ease patients into the experience. So what we've created is actually a starting room where you have a platform, and the only thing you do is just gently move up and down. You don't move forward yet. You can just get used to the virtual reality experience. So also for people who've maybe never even been in virtual reality before, it's very nice to have this starting environment to get acclimated. And then only once the patient is ready, or once the clinician wants to start the session, then they hit the button on the control, and then they're released into the actual experience. So that's also one of the, on the development side of things that we have changed. So now onto the research findings. So we started with different research lines together with our partners at St. Mauritius, but also at Wroclaw Medical University. And so these are the two studies, the pilot studies that we are currently in the process of running. On the one hand, with the St. Mauritius Clinic, we are running some clinician interviews, and also some, eventually we're going to also do some sessions with patients, some play sessions. And in that we want to gather feedback mostly on the user experience, but also the potential of using it in actual sessions and what is needed for that. What should we change in order to make that happen? What is important for that? So yeah, we've finalized the clinician interviews, which I will show you some insights from later, and the patient sessions will follow as well. On the side of the Wroclaw Medical University, there we are also running a pilot at the moment. Similarly, we're also running clinician interviews there, and they're also, actually this April, they started running the pilot with patients, so that's also patients with functional disorders, and they go through multiple sessions with Deep, and there we're also gathering data on the user experience, but also on how useful it is for them, or how useful they perceive it. So what we have found so far, one aspect of the things that we asked them was that both clinicians, but also the patients that are running through the sessions, are filling out a user experience questionnaire, and it measures different aspects of the experience. For instance, how attractive they thought it was, how easy it was to use, and also how novel they found it, for instance. And so what you see here on the screen are the first initial results that came in. So on the one side we have the scores from the clinicians that we talked to in St. Mauritius. And there you see that it scored high on attractiveness, but also perspicuity. It's an interesting thing, but basically that comes down to the ease of use. So it scored pretty high on that. But we see that there might be still some improvements to be made in stimulation. And you will also see that later in the clinician interviews. That's also reflected in there, so we'll get into that a little bit later. And we also have some very preliminary data already from some of the patients at the Wroclaw Medical University, so the functional disorder patients who went through some play sessions with us. And there you see actually that, well, it scores pretty high on a lot of the aspects, but there it was a little bit lower on novelty. And actually when you look at the feedback, it's pretty similar to what the clinicians said. So yeah, let's go into some of the clinician interviews. Yeah, so we in total interviewed 11 clinicians, so some from Wroclaw Medical University and some from St. Mauritius. And we've summarized some of the main aspects here. In general, people seem to be very positive about the experience, and we're open to trying it out with their patients, so that's very important. So here, for instance, you see one of the quotes that some of the clinicians mentioned, that they found it appealing, and that they liked the focus on breathing because they felt like that was an underappreciated aspect of a lot of treatments. So here are some general findings. So on the positive side, of positive aspects that were mentioned in the interview, things were like that was a calming and it was an appealing environment and it looked nice. Specifically, they liked a lot of the reactive elements in it. So you see this there's you saw that previously, there was a circle that always moves with you, but also the plants and everything around you reacts to your breathing. And they found that very interesting also in terms of motivating the patients of focusing on their breath. Also the ease of the setup, so that you were, that it wasn't difficult to put on and to start the game and to run a session. The belt was also found to be easy to use and put on, and a lot of people were surprised at how sensitive it actually was. So those are some of the positive things that were mentioned, for instance. And then some of the downsides that were mentioned were, for instance, something that came back a lot was that there wasn't really a clear goal in the experience. Actually, Deep is kind of a very free, exploratory environment, so you don't really have a specific question you need to do or a specific goal. But yeah, some of the clinicians mentioned that specifically for a training purpose, for rehabilitation purpose, it might be more useful to implement some of that, or at least get more of a sense of progression between sessions, for instance, or even in the sessions, am I doing it well, so that they can know how to improve. So that was very useful feedback. Then when we asked them also about potential uses, so where could they see this being used, or in what sense could they see this being used in their practices? So for instance, some of the potential uses that were mentioned is, well, relaxation, stress regulation, for instance, but also improving internal focus. Pain treatment was also interesting, was also mentioned, but also could be used for research purposes, trying it out on different patient groups and seeing how they respond and getting some breathing data perhaps from them. Potential patient groups that were mentioned were, for instance, patients, well, of course the patients that they work with were mostly people with functional disorders, but they often have other issues as well. So, for instance, people who also have problems with anxiety or stress, young patients, clinicians mentioned this would probably be very interested in using it, but also with respiratory issues, for instance. So yeah, a wide variety of patients groups, they could see the use of it. So that was also very interesting for us to hear. Then we also, of course, asked for barriers for implementation, because yeah, what is needed in order for this to be successfully used within these settings, for instance, within the St. Mauritius clinic. And these were the things that were mentioned. Well, similar to what I mentioned before is that some clinicians were worried whether it was stimulating enough. So maybe, especially for some patients, maybe with attention deficits. So if there would be a little bit more variation, for instance, or a bit more focus on goal setting, that might be useful for this patients group. So it's very interesting feedback to receive. There's also mentioned that it might be less accessible for outpatients, because of course you need the headset in order to play it. So yeah, that's also interesting to look into. Of maybe there could be a system where people can borrow the headset, for instance, or there could be a companion app or something like that. But that is interesting to be aware of. That potentially it's mostly interesting for inpatients, and we have to figure out how we can make it more useful for outpatients as well. So yeah, and then on the technical side of things, we had the screencasting so that you can look at what was happening within the headset. That's of course not part of Deep, but more for the hardware. But that seemed to be a very important aspect, so that clinicians could look into what was happening in the session, maybe help steer the session a bit more. But the connection within some clinics is not always that's great to work with. So we're looking into whether there could be a potential for better wireless screencasting and ways to maybe even screencast offline. So yeah, that's also interesting to look into. Then we asked, of course, for some adaptation needs or suggestions that they had for how could we improve it so you're more likely to use it, or that it's more useful for your patients. One thing that was mentioned was a bit more adjustable game settings. So for instance, you could adjust, as a clinician, adjust the speed or the sensitivity, create some feedback reports maybe of how it was going during the sessions, so that you could also compare that between sessions, for instance. An exposure environment is also very interesting that was mentioned. So now the environment is very relaxing and calm, but maybe a more challenging environment that is actually more stress-inducing would be interesting to practice in. And yeah, so there was, as you can see, a lot of different things. We all are taking this into account into our next development sprints to see whether we can implement these aspects. Then just briefly some other lessons learned in general, what we've learned through this project. Well, of course, through doing these clinician interviews and the patient sessions that are currently happening or will continue on, we'll gather, of course, more feedback and insight into the needs that are there in order to make this a useful intervention or useful tool. We've learned a lot about collaboration with medical partners. Previously, we've mostly been working together with research partners, and the patients were mostly subclinical groups of patients with anxiety. So that's, of course, a very different environment, but it was very interesting to us to have that opportunity for collaboration. We've also learned a lot about, or still continuing to learn a lot about the ethics side of things, like medical device regulation. So we're currently looking into that as well to see how we can make that happen for DEEP. Next steps, we're continuing, of course, the research that we're doing right now. We've also set up, in the process of setting up a pilot with the Radboud University Medical Center with ex-patients, so who've had long COVID, but as a first step to get some feedback for them, and then see whether later on we can also do it with people who are currently still having long COVID symptoms. We're continuing to gather more feedback and looking into the medical device regulation, and we're also sharing our knowledge in different platforms like this one, where we'll also, for instance, be at the AWE, which is the Augmented World Expo, where we'll share a little bit more about the project. So, if you want to see what we're up to, and to look into some of the research results that will follow, you can find us, of course, on the Explore Deep website, and we'll get updates as they follow.
Well, thank you very much, Joanneke, for this interesting talk, and great to see how design is changing the world. And I do have a question for you, if that's possible. You talked a little bit about the interaction and the interaction game, especially for rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So now it's this beautiful underwater world, but you wanted to bring in some cues or some clues to follow or some tasks to do.
Yeah.
How would you vision that? How would that look like, that world?
Yeah, and there's also a different aspect to that, because we also heard us on the one hand, if you, for instance, focus more on stress relaxation or anxiety, then it's okay to have more of an open world and you can just relax and go there. But if you want for training, then it might be more interesting. And we've already thought about ways to do this. One way is, of course, that in order to make you come back multiple times, there's different paths you could explore, different things you can collect, but also some things could even happen outside of the game. Like you have this progress report that will show you, hey, this is how you were breathing in this session. You can compare that to the next session, for instance, or looking into whether you can set more specific goals together with patients. Like, okay, this time I'm going to practice in this type of rhythm. So practicing different types of breathing patterns would be interesting. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ideas that we have. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot, and also we're probably also going to hear from the patients. Yeah. Some ideas that we're going to integrate there to see what would be a way that they would envision it being more appealing, or that would get them back. So, yeah.
Well, deriving from the VR4Rehab project is the XR4Rehab cooperation and association and the innovation platform. And maybe it would be a good thing to do another hackathon and to talk with more rehab specialists on how we could, let's say, work with Explore Deep and to bring that to the next level.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you very much for your very interesting talk.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. All right, and last but not least, we're now going to turn to our good friends in the University Hospital in Leuven. And I mentioned her before, she was a true hero of the corona pandemic, because they were in the forefront fighting in the intensive care units with COVID patients. And in the middle of that, let's say the brilliant scientist Eline Hagendoorn developed the idea of motiveer UZelf, motivate yourself, a long COVID intervention already in the ICU. So I'm dying to know what's happened in Leuven the last time. So Eline, the floor is yours, and I'm very much looking forward to this one.
Thank you, Remco. I hope you all see my PowerPoint. So let's then start. So good afternoon. I am Eline Hagedorn. I'm a physiotherapist in the University Hospitals in Leuven in Belgium, and I'm proud to present you the results of our project of virtual reality rehabilitation on the intensive care unit. I have no conflicts of interest to declare for this presentation. So we all know that early activity during the ICU stay is very important, for example, to maximize functional outcome. So what about syndromes like long COVID or like the post-intensive care syndrome, where there are long-term deficits like fatigue, physical, cognitive, and psychological impairments are a major problem? Maybe to maximize the functional outcomes of those patients, we could also look back at the importance of early activity already in the ICU. But paced early activity during the ICU is challenging. So how can we keep patients motivated for activity, especially when having a long stay at ICU? And many of patients are also isolated or bedridden, so having limited movement options and limited tools available. This is where we believe that interactive virtual reality can keep the motivation high by having a change of virtual environment and by being something different as a rehabilitation tool. And maybe virtual reality can give an automatic trigger to move. So the purpose of our clinical trial was to test the feasibility, safety, and appreciation in both patients and therapists of the use of virtual reality in the physical rehabilitation during the ICU stay. Virtual reality has already been researched for medical purposes, but for the ICU, it is still a quite new domain of research. So to start, we developed an ICU-specific virtual reality rehabilitation application based on bottom-up feedback from a multidisciplinary team. And we created 2 games. So one painting game, more in the field of physiotherapists, one memory game, more in the field of occupational therapists, and one relaxing space, more in the fields of psychologists. All games are performed by arm movements. One relaxing, we estimate that the technology readiness level at this point is 6. So this means that the prototype is now tested in the intended environment and that it works close to the expected performance. So let me show you the software. So this is a tablet that the therapist has in his hands during the sessions. And this is a calibration. So we ask the patient to move the right and left hand. So now the basic playing area of the patient is set. And then we can move to a game. This is the painting game. With every movement of a patient's arm, the virtual paintbrush is slowly revealing a beautiful picture. The therapist can alter the canvas and can, for example, put it further or more up to provoke a different arm movement. The relaxing space can be used in between exercises so that there is no need to take off the goggles for pacing in between. Volume, visuals, and type of landscape can be altered depending on the wishes of the patient. And this is the memory game. The patient sees one object, then the object goes away, and 3 to 9 new objects appear. Then it's up to the patient to grab the one they just saw before. Also here, we can alter the theme and we can alter the difficulty level. So after the development of the app, we started a study phase. We wrote a protocol which was accepted by the ethic committees of the Federal Agency of Medicines and Health Products in Belgium within the scope of the medical device regulation. We screened for 9 weeks between 9th of January and the 9th of April this year. We included the calm, alert adult patients in need for physiotherapy and medically cleared by a physician, being at the ICU for at least 3 days and having the prognosis of staying there another 2 weeks at least. They should be able to move at least one arm against gravity. Safety was assessed by recording heart rate, respiratory rate, blood pressure, and oxygen saturation, and by reporting all minor and all major adverse events. Feasibility was assessed by registering the time needed for setup, instruction, use and cleaning of the device, and by encouraging patients and therapists to report any kind of problem at any time, and by having questionnaires for patients and therapists focusing on technical, motivational aspects, usefulness, and enjoyments. Included patients got 3 to 9 sessions of virtual reality rehabilitation therapy at a frequency of 3 times a week. They could choose which game they wanted to play at any time. The virtual reality sessions did not interfere with the regular rehabilitation program of the patient. And this is how it looked like. So let's take you through the results. So we have got 296 patients admitted to our surgical ICUs. And after screening for inclusion and exclusion criteria, there were 24 patients eligible for study participation. 20 of them gave their informed consent. Those patients ranged in age from 19 years to 77 years, 5 females, 15 males, being at the ICU at the time of inclusion 5 days up to 145 days. And you can see there was a variety of admission reasons. We conducted in total 79 virtual reality rehabilitation sessions. So as you can see, even patients being mechanically ventilated, or even when having dialysis, like you can see here also in the picture, and here the mechanical ventilation, or even when having bandages around the hands, or being in isolation, that was no problem to conduct the sessions. As you can see here and here, these are typical ICU critical ill patients that we included. So we screened for minor and major adverse events, and I'm glad to tell you that we had none during all the sessions. So we can conclude that virtual reality is safe. The time needed for setup was in most of the cases 2 minutes. The sessions where it took longer, the reasons for time delay was documented. In 6 sessions, there were connection problems, which could be solved by rebooting the system or by changing the set. One time, the system crashed, which we could not solve, but apparently there was a worldwide meta update problem at that point, and it could be fixed afterwards by our customer support. So we found out that a good customer support is very crucial for a well-functioning virtual reality system. Other time-related problems were not related to the virtual reality on itself. As you can see, after a quick explanation, the first session, for all the upcoming sessions, the patient did not need explanation anymore. They knew right away what was the goal of the exercise. And the time of virtual reality execution, and most times they trained for 10 or 15 minutes. Time for shutting down and cleaning took in most cases not more than 2 minutes. So after every session, patients were asked 3 questions. How short of breath do you feel? How fatigued do you feel? And how much fun did you have? You can see here that most patients were not fatigued, were not short of breath. Of course, there were some patients who were more fatigued or more short of breath, but that's typical of a training in the ICU. You can see that most patients, so the average fun score of the 79 sessions was 8.5 out of 10. So this is a really nice result. So we can conclude that virtual reality is not very time consuming, and that's a good and a fun training for the patients. So that's feasible to conduct this in an ICU environment. So after all the sessions, patients got another questionnaire of 12 questions. And this is the summarization of it, but it's a lot of data, so I will summarize it for you. So the first 3 questions were about the technical aspects of the virtual reality. And you can see that most patients are very happy with the technical results. Then the next 3 questions were about how did you feel? Were you comfortable physically, mentally, emotionally during the VR sessions? And did you feel present in the virtual world? Also here you can see most patients, they did. And then the next 4 questions were about how much did you like it? Did you find this useful? Did you find it a good training? And would you like to redo it in the future? You can see that it's clear that the patient did feel that this was a good, useful, fun training to do, that they would like to continue. For the question, were you more motivated when training with the VR? instead of the conventional rehabilitation therapy, this was a mixed answer pattern. And also for the question, did you feel the VR became boring after a while? Also here, this was a mixed answer pattern. After all the sessions, we also asked for suggestions of the patients and therapists. This is some of the suggestions, but we can summarize it up by, in fact, it were most of the time technical comments. So patients asked for software upgrades, so they wanted to have more type of games or more levels, more variation. And also for hardware updates, so they wanted an even better goggles that were more easy to put on, and that's where we could adjust the brightness of the screen. So we still have to analyze a follow-up questionnaire. So 1 month after the ICU discharge, we will ask again some questions about the VR during the ICU stay. Unfortunately, we will have 4 patients as dropouts because 1 patient got an early discharge of the ICU, but 3 patients deceased in meanwhile, not having to do anything with the virtual reality, but being with critical ill. So in conclusion, we can say that virtual reality rehabilitation on the ICU for critically ill patients is safe and feasible. In the future, we believe that VR might be a game changer in the ICU for physical and mental rehabilitation for critically ill patients. So now we will focus on further scientific goals. So I think it's time to now focus on efficacy of interactive gaming of virtual reality, even when challenging a medical device, when facing challenging medical device regulations. So maybe now we should look at the effects on neuromuscular and cognitive parameters, and maybe also on the socio-economic impact of it. For development, we will also go further with it to try to optimize the hardware and expanding the software, for example, by having more levels, more number of games, moving up to the next TRL level, and maybe also include the lower extremities. Maybe this variety can increase the motivation with the patients. And we will, of course, look to further implement virtual reality in rehabilitation settings. So thank you for your attention. And if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Eline, for your brilliant talk and your interesting research that you've done in this perspective. And I hope that you will be available for questions in the Webinar Geek application. So people, if you have any questions, please talk to Eline in the Webinar Geek and she can answer that. Furthermore, I can tell you that this webinar is also recorded and will be available through our VR4Rehab website from coming weeks. So we need a few days to edit a little bit, but then we will put it online in VR4Rehab.org. So please have a look at that. And then there's 2 more things I want to do. First of all, I want to invite you all to a beautiful conference which will take place in Amsterdam on the 29th and the 30th of June this year. And this webinar of this conference is called Scale Up for Impact. And what we want to do, we want to scale up virtual reality technology in rehabilitation and in pain. There are beautiful speakers from all over the world, from California, from France, from Italy, from Germany, from all over. And I hope you are able to join us and get a ticket and be there with us. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your attendance today in this conference. I want to thank my studio audience for supporting me. I want to thank the technical guys who made everything flawless. Thank you very much. I want to thank our speakers who did whatever they could to share their knowledge with you. And I want to thank you, and I hope that you keep pushing to help to find a cure for long COVID. And with that, I thank you very much and wish you a beautiful evening. Bye-bye.